Welcome back to PHIL 2103, Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics. We are now in the midst of discussing the just war theory. Now, as we talked about in nonviolent pacifism says that there is no reason that we should ever go to war. However, the just war theory acknowledges that there are just some reasons to go to war that simply cannot be denied. The just war theory originated in the time of St. Augustine, but was systematically developed over time and through the Middle Ages by Catholic theologians. And traditionalists of this system would say that the only justifiable wars are wars of self-defense. But as things have gone on, we found that we needed an objective way to measure and see what wars are just and what are considered unjust. This allows governing bodies, especially ones like the UN, to be able to see that when conflict arises between two countries, which is justified in their actions. So let's talk about these 8 criteria that must be in place in order for a war to be considered justified. The first one is just cause. Just cause says that we must be engaging in this war to stop, for example, massacre of large numbers of people, to reverse the systematic and long-term violations of human rights, liberty, and community. So there must be a good reason why this war is being engaged in. It must have a just cause. The second one is just authority. Constitutional process must be followed so that the people who pay with their lives and resources will be represented in the decision made going to war. So, as I've said in class before, that means that the president may engage us into a war. However, the president of Home Depot may not be able to. We need to have just authority taking that first step towards it. The approval of the United Nations or a representative of an international body or a coalition should generally be sought to provide a check and balance to make sure that we are engaging in a proper war with proper authority. The third piece is that it must be a last resort. All means of negotiation, conflict resolution, and prevention must be exhausted before resorting to war. We must engage in all creative measures possible to ensure that we are not just taking a premature step towards war, but once we have exhausted all options, that is when it becomes just war. There must also be just intention. That is a final cause or a future aim that is just in the scenario. The only legitimate intention, according to the just war theory, is to secure peace for all of those involved. Neither revenge, nor conquest, nor economic gain, nor any type of ideological supremacy is allowed as justifiable in this system. Enemy states must be treated morally, and they must strategically be considered as future partners in the intentionality of this order. So meaning, as we have just intention, reconciliation becomes the primary focus. We must also have then the probability of success. Now this one confuses some students because the underdog oftentimes is the one we root for. But under the just war theory, the thought is that lives have too frequently and needlessly been lost in blind and futile wars. So there must be at least a reasonable hope of success for it to be considered just. There must also be a proportionality of cost. Proportionality requires that the total good achieved by the victory will outweigh the total evil and suffering that war will cause. So it's a utilitarian standpoint, and that good must outweigh the wrong that's going to be done. There must also be a clear announcement. The government that is about to make war must announce its intention to make war and its conditions that may be provided for avoiding that war to take place. Preemptive strikes in this case, although we'll talk about how they can logically be considered to be okay, must not be employed as a first result. We must engage in and clearly announce that these are the actions that must be taken or war will be engaged in. And lastly, there must be just means. So for example with this, any nuclear war would be unjust. Chemical warfare would be considered unjust. Any direct intentional attacks on non-military persons would be unjust. Individuals that are not actively contributing to the conflict, which includes POWs, casualties, and civilians, which are non-participants, should be immune from attack. Bombing a military target may have indirect and secondary spillover effect, killing some civilians or injuring non-military targets. This is a realistic and allowable occurrence, but when you target non-military as the primary force, it becomes what they call the double effect, which is a negative. So in this, any terrorism or any practice of attacking whoever just happens to be the most convenient target for the purpose of striking terror into the citizens and populace must be avoided. So just means that we must have a somewhat moral conscience behind this, even though we're going to war. A war that fails to meet even just one of these criteria is unjust and must be opposed. It has to meet all 8 for it to be considered just. A just war must be fought by a government and not by individuals. There's some scriptural support, Genesis 9:6 and Romans 13:4, that is often used for the Christian just war theory in this regard. But again, the president may enact us in war, the president of Hope Depot may not. There's a certain level of authority that has to be in place. A just war must be fought justly. If we are going to have a just war, we cannot be taking these measures where we are just nuking a population for just to create an unfair advantage, an unfair balance right away. And then as we look at this, we have to understand that each individual to some degree has to decide for themselves which wars are just and which wars are unjust. Any wars that are fought to execute justice and to restore balance and order are typically considered to be just, but each must examine the evidence. Now, as we look at this, let me quote Geisler in his summation of some of these thoughts. He says, "The activists are right in pointing out that God has ordained government and given it the sword. They are correct in insisting on human obedience to government, even to the point at times of taking life. However, the pacifists are right that we should pursue peace and try to live peaceably with all men. We should be peacemakers and not war makers, and we should resort to war only when all efforts towards peace have failed." The just war argument out of Romans chapter 13, 1 through 7 follows like this. The state has been entrusted by God with a divinely given responsibility to wield force only as necessary to maintain social order and to secure justice. In the Bible, individuals participated with the state in the exercise of its God-given responsibilities, and citizens are called to support the state in the exercise of God-given responsibility as long as the state does not command something that the Bible forbids. So in the Bible, you will see a higher calling to be in tune with God's laws, even over governmental laws, when the governmental laws contradict what God's laws are. And if the state is exercising its legitimate God-given authority by using force to maintain order, then the Christian just war theory would say that there is no reasons why Christians cannot be involved in a legitimate God-given role. This does not mean that individuals are commanded to use force in participation with the state, only that they are permitted to do so if it is necessary. So let's talk about extending the just war theory out just a little bit. If you are accepting the just war theory, then 2 positions may logically follow. First of all, a preventative strike may seem to be morally acceptable. Now, I know that may seem out of whack with some of the things we just said, but what the understanding is, once you accept just war theory, self-defense taken in response to an act becomes the same as anticipation of an imminent attack. So the preemptive strike is not just something that we just do because we feel like it. It's in a response only if there is an imminent threat that is involved. The only difference that's seen is the timing in the actions being taken. The second is that if war is justifiable to prevent or restrain the spread of evil by a hostile, aggressive nation or ruler, it may also be justifiable to use force to then reverse iniquities or injustices that are perpetrated on vulnerable nations. This is only true in the use of force to reverse clear and problematic injustices. Now, Dr. Wendell Sutton, who has been teaching this course on campus for the last 21 years, leaves us with a few thoughts. He says, first of all, while the use of necessary and proportionate force and even lethal force may be permissible or even justified in rare circumstances, believers are called first and foremost to be creative and courageous in employing nonviolent means as peacemakers in an effort to achieve a nonviolent resolution to conflict. Notice the language in this. We may be justified, but we are called first to be creative in our efforts, first to be nonviolent. And so in that, I leave you with this summary of the just war theory. This just war theory must meet all 8 of those criteria in order for it to be considered just. But note, it is an objective set of values. And so if we are to understand the world through a relativistic lens, a self-centered lens, then this starts to change its course. But it should show you that at least by some measure we must have objective rules, objective views in place in order to be able to clearly distinguish and understand when two ideological forces or two military forces come together against one another. So let's talk about some last key issues and then sum up this whole war theory, and then I'll let you get into writing your paper.